Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in a few minutes. As we are going live on Facebook and checking to see. Lorna, are you able to be the interpreter? We're just checking on interpretation here. Oh, Wesley is in with the wrong thing. I don't know, Wesley's on the wrong thing. So I'm gonna promote Wesley to panelist. Okay. All right. Lorna, we're working on promoting you to, for some reason, we're sorry everybody who's waiting. We're having a few technical difficulties today. We are just looking to figure out how to get our interpreter on as an interpreter. Okay, but why don't we, you know what, I guess what we need to do is just see if anybody needs interpretation, and then we will work very hard to get you interpretation. If currently there is no need, then we normally don't need it. So if somebody needs, hey, Sophia, could you do me a huge favor? Could you say in Spanish, if anyone needs interpretation, please type it in the chat. Oh, your mute is on.
Si alguien necesita interpretación, por favor, indíquelo en el chat.
Thank you. Do you mind typing that in too in the chat, Sophia? Or is that
no, I can do that.
Thank you so much.
No worries.
All right. We're sorry, everybody, for the technical difficulties. This is the first time this has happened. We're not sure. Maybe interpretation needs to be fixed within the backside. Okay. So, all right. You know what? We just need to get started. Okay, Ed? And we will figure out how to deal with it and put it in the link. All right. Ed, can you get us started?
Yeah, I understand.
Okay, so if you could get us, we are live on Facebook. Okay, great. So all the people on Facebook are seeing it. All right, sorry everybody. Sorry for the technical difficulties. We're gonna get started. My name is Judy Mark. I'm the president of Disability Voices United and the co-chair of Disability Vote California, which is a coalition of disability organizations throughout the state who work together to ensure that people with disabilities, their family members, and professionals in the disability field get out and vote this cycle. This is our last webinar and our last activity for the 2020 election cycle, well, we hope. And we're here to just talk about how we thought the election went, or we should really rephrase that as still going. There's clearly a lot of votes that still need to be counted. And we are monitoring to see if there's any breaking news during our panel. So we want to thank everybody first for joining us. We promise we are working on Spanish translation. It does appear that there may be no need for Spanish translation at this time through Zoom, but we will try to make that available if that becomes necessary. And Lorna, we want you to know you are on as a panelist, so that's good. All right, so at the beginning, I just want to tell everybody what Disability Vote California is. So Disability Vote California as a name and as a sort of coalition was a small coalition of a few organizations that really came together and provided a huge amount of information in 2018 for the midterm elections. And it's been greatly expanded with over 40 organizations statewide, and we have really worked together very hard, meeting weekly to bring together our community. We have some lessons learned we're going to share with you today, as well as what we should look for in the future to try to really bring out people with disabilities to vote and their family members. But first, we want to talk about the election, and I've asked Alan Erenbaum, who's an election expert, to try to give us the state of play on the presidential race, which as of this moment, you may be watching this tomorrow, but as of this moment has not yet been declared, and as well as and also to talk about what happened in the state of California around propositions. But before I switch it over to Alan, it looks like we have the translation sorted out. And Ed, why don't you go ahead and turn on translation just in case anybody joins us and needs it. For those people who do need the the Spanish translation, you can go down to and click on interpretation and then click on Spanish, and you will be able to hear the Spanish translation from Lorna Silva. All right, so let's get started. Alan, Alan is sitting right next to me, actually. Please don't think that I'm breaking any code rules. He actually lives in my household and is my husband. So I'm going to let him appear and I will disappear. Wow, it's like magic. Here, go a little bit over. All right, so you can control this and you can share. Do you want me to share the screen or do you want to talk first?
I'll talk for just a minute. Hello, everyone. I don't have any special insight into the presidential election. So although I am a chronic watcher of cable news, so I am following the developments very closely. So I will give just a very brief update on where things stand. And if there are specific questions later, we can address them. But we are awaiting, well, I guess from a big picture perspective, we're not going to have final results for several weeks in most states, because that's how long it takes states to make sure that every single vote has been received and properly tabulated and counted, and signatures have been checked and all of the things that are done. So what we are really waiting on right now is for news organizations to declare winners in enough states to give one of the candidates a majority of the electoral votes. And that is really at this point down to 4 states: Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania. And all of those states are in kind of the final stages of counting votes. Some have more than others. Georgia has the least number of votes still to count. Arizona has the most number of votes still to count. There are vote counts being updated as we go, and all of those states are expected to deliver the results of additional votes today, this afternoon and this evening. Most of them will not deliver the results of all of their votes today or this evening. But it certainly appears that Vice President Biden is likely to prevail in all 4 of those states, but it remains to be seen. We are still waiting for news organizations to do whatever they do in terms of their analysis of the votes and to call a state result. So if Vice President Biden wins Pennsylvania, he will be declared the president-elect. If he wins Arizona and Nevada, he will be declared the president-elect, and there's various other combinations. So from my perspective, in looking at the data, it is a little surprising that there hasn't been a call on at least some of these states, but it may come in 1 minute, it may come in 1 day, it may come early next week. It's really a little bit, that aspect of it isn't really transparent. So there have been, just on the other issue besides the ballot counting is the lawsuits that have been filed by the Trump campaign challenging various aspects of the election in all of these states. There are more than a dozen lawsuits that have been filed. I suspect there'll be more to come. At this point, there haven't been any, those lawsuits have been largely unsuccessful, certainly substantively unsuccessful. And there's not a lot of meat on the bones there. There's not a lot of allegations that have a lot of evidence, but those cases will proceed and play out in the court system. So I think that's it on the, did I miss anything, Judy, on the election side? Okay, so.
Do you want to talk about the Senate?
Oh, the US Senate appears to be headed to a, the most likely scenario at this point is that there will be 50 Republican senators and 48 Democratic senators, with 2 races that will, in Georgia, which will both go to a runoff on January 5th. One, because it was a special election and nobody, well, both because neither of the candidates got, none of the candidates got more than 50% of the vote in either the Georgia regular Senate election or the Georgia special Senate election. So by Georgia law, both of those elections will move to a runoff election, which will be held on January 5th. Those will be extremely significant elections because if Joe Biden wins the presidential election, that means that if both of the Democrats in Georgia were to prevail on January 5th, there would be a 50-50 tie in the US Senate, and that tie is broken by the vice president, who would be Kamala Harris. So again, if Joe Biden is the winner, then control of the US Senate will rest on the results of the Georgia runoff elections on January 5th. And the US House is expected to stay in Democratic control, although the most likely scenario right now is that Republicans, there will be more Republicans in the next US House than there are currently, as Republicans have flipped several Democratic seats this week. But there are still many dozens of US House races which are have not been called, including several here in California, and several of the California races are really too close, or literally too close to call. It is undetermined. So that might be a good transition for me to talk about California results. And one of the reasons for the uncertainty in California is that California looks like the number of votes cast will be 17 million across the state, which is a very high turnout. So about between 75 and 80%. And as of this morning, there are still 4 million California votes which have not yet been counted. They have been accepted. They will be counted, but they haven't been included in the vote totals. So that's a huge number. There are, for example, upwards of 500,000 in LA County alone that have not yet been counted. So there's a lot of room for, particularly when you get to some of the closer congressional races and closer state Senate and Assembly races, and of course local measures and things like that. If they are looking close today, then we don't really know. And as is the case in most places in the country, the typical patterns aren't necessarily being followed this year due to the changing voting habits due to the pandemic, and California for the first time sending mail ballots to everybody. So it's hard to know in some of these cases. But we can talk a little bit about the propositions.
You want me to share?
Yeah, that would be great. And where they stand right now, the statewide propositions. We're going to share the current status of the results of those propositions. And I can just run through them quickly. This is a pretty clear picture. This is official results from the Secretary of State's office. Prop 14, the stem cell bond is passing, although it's narrow. Prop 15 to increase property or to reassess property tax on commercial property to provide additional funding for government services is losing by about 500 or 425,000 votes at this point. And it doesn't look like that result will, it doesn't really look like to me and like any of these results will change, to be honest, even given the large number of votes that are outstanding, because there isn't a huge variation in jurisdiction, which is often what can change a result. If you have a lot of ballots outstanding from a jurisdiction which is going to have a different result, that can make a difference. Prop 15, for example, in LA County, the result is only slightly different. It's kind of flipped on the percentages. It's like 51 to 48 or so in LA County in favor of Prop 15. But even after all of the LA County votes would be counted, it wouldn't make up for probably enough of that deficit to turn Prop 15 around, at least in my initial preliminary look. Prop 16 on to repeal the ban on affirmative action is definitely not going to pass. So the restriction on affirmative action in employment and education and government contracting will stay in place. Prop 17 to expand voting rights for people who were formerly incarcerated, formerly in jail, is going to pass. Prop 18 to give certain 17-year-olds the right to vote is not going to pass. Prop 19 to change property tax rules to provide a marginal benefit to, one of the things that it does is provides a marginal benefit to people with physical disabilities to purchase more expensive homes and pay a lower tax rate. That proposition is leading, although narrowly as well. Prop 20 to roll back some of the criminal justice reforms is definitely going to fail. Prop 21 to expand local government's ability to do rent control is definitely failing. Prop 22, the Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, Postmates, app-based drivers classification law will definitely pass. Prop 23 to change the rules for kidney dialysis clinics will fail. Prop 24 to change the relatively new California privacy law and update it will pass, and Prop 25 to eliminate the money bail system in criminal proceedings will fail. So that's where we are.
Basically, everything that I voted for didn't seem to pass or fail. I didn't do well on, if I was a betting person, I wouldn't have done well on the propositions, that's for sure. Okay, so I'm going to stop the share screen and we're going to move on to some of our other speakers. And then we promise everybody who's watching, whether you're on Facebook or whether you're watching here on Zoom, we will get to a part where you can ask questions. We're going to give you 3 options this time. We're going to give you option 1 is to ask it through the Q&A, which I'll monitor, and then I'll read the questions to our presenters. Secondly, you can ask it through the chat, which is not as great because it's hard to monitor the chat because things move quickly, but I will try. And then finally, if you really want to ask your question by speaking your question to the panelists, you can use the raise hand feature, and I will call on you and promote you to panelists. Okay, so our next speaker, thank you, Alan. Our next speaker is Paul Spencer from Disability Rights California, who runs their voter outreach, voter protection department. I'm not sure, you tell me. He's a staff attorney in voter protection. I'm sure DRC has a very technical name for it. But he has helped to run a division of DRC that has been so important, including a hotline that voters can call even during the day of the election and ensure that their right to vote is kept. And I asked Paul to just tell us, how did things go? What did you hear about hotline? What did you see or out there? What were there problems with people accessing their right to vote? What went right as well? Thanks, Paul, for joining us.
Thanks, Judy. So I'm Paul Spencer. I'm a staff attorney in Disability Rights California's Voting Rights Practice Group is our official title. And I'm part of a team of attorneys and advocates that work to make voting accessible in California. It has definitely been a very busy week for us, on top of just a really, really busy election year, especially given that with COVID, we pretty much completely changed how we're offering voting in California. And myself and my colleagues have been really keen to make sure that voting stays accessible throughout those changes. And as I give this update, I'm pretty pleased with how things turned out. I mean, things weren't perfect, but things were pretty good. So, like I said, it's been a busy week. We've been done some really long days this week. Alan, thank you for the update. I've been doing my best to follow the news at night. I get done working, but I've mostly been falling asleep on the couch. So some stuff I haven't taken great tabs on. I will say one thing DRC does is we do take positions on propositions. And one of them was Prop 17, which restores the right to vote for parolees, which is great. It's good for people with disabilities. It's also good just for education and outreach when we're explaining the voter registration requirements. It just makes it that much easier to explain. So that's great. But for the election, we run a hotline for voters with disabilities, which Judy mentioned. And I'm also going to provide our number again. If folks have follow-up questions, or if you had some issue during the election you want to talk about that's disability related, we're happy to always talk with you about it. We do a lot of education and outreach. We've done a presentation with this group. We do media interviews. We try to put a lot of toolkits online, explaining what the rules for voting are to voters with disabilities. So that went pretty well. It's been really busy. And we also do a poll monitoring project. So we try to observe voting at county elections offices across the state. And we observed in about 10 counties this time. So, and I'll give a little feedback for, the things we saw, the mostly good, some stuff that could be improved. So, as Alan mentioned, with California going to all vote by mail, it's sort of changed how we're processing, counting all those, because there's more vote by mail ballots. But it also changed sort of how our hotline ran. We got a lot more calls in the beginning of October than we normally get because more people are getting vote by mail ballots. And we got a lot of questions about how to sign your ballot if you can't sign your name due to a disability. So, California does have some good rules in place that protect voters with disabilities in this situation, where you can sign your vote by mail ballot with a mark, typically an X, and then you have a witness, could be anyone, friend, family member, neighbor. They print your name next to the X, and then that person signs the vote by mail envelope. The issue, though, is the instructions on the county elections envelopes could be a little better. So, it's one thing we're probably going to be interested in trying to improve. There are clear requirements for what has to be on those vote by mail envelopes, but it's up to counties for how they're laying out that information on the envelope. So, the Center for Civic Design does have which is actually a pretty cool election thing if folks are interested. But they have a suggested envelope format, which is really good. It takes into account the needs of people with disabilities. But long story short, we answered a lot of calls with people just struggling to figure out what those rules were. So I think we helped a lot of people, but we were sort of surprised by the volume of calls. We got lots of calls too from, voting if you're someone that has dementia, typically from family members for what the rules are. And I can just quickly tell you what the rules are if you're assisting someone voting with dementia. So, if the person with dementia has a desire to vote, they should vote. That's the first thing, is they need to have a desire to vote. And then secondly, if you're assisting someone with filling out a ballot, you can't influence or pressure how they're voting. You just need to help them record the ballot. So that was typically the question, can a family member vote? And if so, can I assist them? And the answer is yes to both of those, if you follow those basic rules. So we got a lot of questions about those. So maybe let's talk about some good things that we saw from our poll monitoring and from our hotline work. Across the state, there was in-person voting available, which is great. I mean, in-person voting is important for voters with disabilities because that's where the accessible voting equipment is. If you need extra help, it's there. So it's really important that in-person voting was available. Another thing about in-person voting, why it's important, even if you're sending everyone a vote by mail ballot, is not everyone has equal access to mail. So, having the option for people still to be able to go in person, and also to go in person to update their voter registration or to register for the first time, that's an important protection for voters with disabilities, for folks with limited income. If you're not housing secure, there's all kinds of reasons why in-person voting is really important. And, we really pushed the state to make sure that happens. And, that was difficult to convince people to be interested in doing in April right when the pandemic started. But, I kind of think cooler heads prevailed. The Secretary of State, put out some good guidelines for the density of in-person voting that was required. But, a lot of counties in the state were doing elections a little differently than they normally do, in that counties that have traditional polling locations were condensing them into larger super consolidated polling locations, or they were calling them vote centers. But basically, instead of 1,000-person location, they were having 10,000 voters for each of these. And some counties did have some heavy crowding on election day, which is bad. They had long lines. So DRC, along with other voting rights groups, we were monitoring the lines. We were communicating with each other, coming up with strategies to try to resolve issues, and also contacting election officials to try to get them to fix things where we think they needed to be fixed. So overall, though, the in-person voting, it worked well. There weren't any meltdowns. In March, LA County had really long lines, and they had some widespread voting equipment problems with the voter check-in process. So there were issues in other counties, but generally things went okay, which is great. One thing we obviously want voting locations to be physically accessible, but we also don't want them to be too crowded, because even the most accessible building, if it's packed with voters, it isn't accessible. One good thing about the COVID is, there's social distancing. They're trying to have less people in there, so that's good. Let me say my favorite thing from the election, and I want to preface this with that. I mean, this doesn't mean there's not an issue there, but our hotline in March and on Tuesday, we didn't get any calls from voters with disabilities that were trying to vote and the accessible voting equipment was broken. and the poll workers weren't able to fix it. You know, in years past, we would get these calls every election day. And, you know, it's typically a voter who's blind or a voter who's low vision, who's using accessible equipment, which was malfunctioning, and the poll workers weren't able to fix it. This happened over and over again, you know, really advocating to get counties to improve their poll worker training and their equipment. But one nice thing, as of this year, all counties were required to have new accessible voting systems in place. So, you know, this is our first primary in general with that new equipment in place. And what do you know, we didn't get any hotline calls that the equipment was broken. It doesn't mean that someone might not have experienced a barrier. And if they did, you know, please let us know. We're happy to follow up with it. But it's an indication perhaps that the new equipment has helped, because, you know, prior to this year, a lot of counties in California were using accessible voting systems that were 12, 14 years old. And I mean, you could imagine what your computer at home looks like if it gets that old. It's just buggy and difficult to work. So anyway, that's great. We're really happy that all the counties have new accessible voting systems in place. So, you know, just some other issues we saw. There was heavier than usual interest in curbside voting. So curbside voting is available for voters with disabilities at in-person locations. They'll bring a ballot out to you. But, you know, how curbside voting was offered sort of varied by county. Like, we would have liked to have seen better signage outside indicating that curbside was available, with either a doorbell to ring or a cell phone for voters that are in the accessible parking spot that want to have curbside voting that can call into the head poll worker inside the voting location. So, you know, some locations didn't have clear signage. So it's one thing we're going to advocate for next year, is to try to get better policies in place for that. You know, some locations had election workers outside standing right by the accessible parking spots ready to offer curbside voting. But, you know, there were a lot of locations we were observing where those spots were out of sight of the elections office. And, you know, if you ever find yourself in that situation, feel free to call our election hotline. We did this on election night. We got callers that were trying to access curbside voting, but they couldn't get the attention of anyone inside, and there were actually long lines at these locations. So we contacted the elections office directly and got them to contact the polling location, and they sent out poll workers to help these people vote. So that's great. Ideally, it wouldn't get to that because there'd be a better procedure in place for asking for curbside voting. But my point is that sometimes we're able to help in that way, and that's great. Other things that could be better, remote accessible vote by mail instructions. So remote accessible vote by mail has been available for voters with disabilities, for all voters with disabilities in the state since this year. But for this election, they actually expanded remote accessible vote by mail to be open to all voters in case, because of COVID, they needed to expand access. So, you know, mostly positive feedback, but, you know, we do think that the remote accessible vote by mail systems could probably have better frequently asked questions. You know, we got some questions in the hotline that we hadn't heard before, and we will probably share those with the Secretary of State and with the county election officials, and try to get just better information online for how to access remote accessible vote by mail. So, you know, things could be better. And then, you know, the last issue that we saw for this election, you know, this has been going on for a couple months, was, you know, people that are in a facility voting for a hospital, skilled nursing facility, locked facilities, to make sure that they had access to vote by mail ballots and to people to assist them with filling out the ballots. Because a lot of these locations, due to COVID, you know, were really weren't allowing patients to leave, and also heavily restricting visitors. But, you know, the California Department of Public Health, CMS, you know, with pressure from advocates, you know, these organizations came out with letters reminding these facilities that they needed to allow voting access. But, you know, DRC a little bit, we had to push some of these hospitals to get them to do it. And generally they did. But, you know, that's another issue we've been working on. Maybe we'll think about that a little more for the future for how that could work better. But the rules are pretty clear. It's just COVID makes things pretty complicated. But then again, you know, they needed to make sure that patients had access to ballots and also access to people to help them fill them out. And, you know, one location in San Diego, they allowed friends and family to come visit with patients at like an outdoor dining area that they'd had. So, I mean, there were creative ways to make sure that people still had access to their ballots, which is great. But it's been a very exciting year for doing elections and making sure that things are accessible. So, you know, things haven't really slowed down yet. I don't really expect them to, but you know, we got a lot of things to think about for things that we want better. But my big takeaway just for overall is things. The vote went pretty well in California, and I think things were pretty accessible for voters with disabilities from our perspective. The Secretary of State will be coming out with some more reporting for the Voters' Choice Act counties, which is about half the voters, which should get some more feedback and data on how voters with disabilities experience this election. But overall, just now doing paperwork, catching up, thinking about things that we want to improve in the future, and hopefully catching up on some sleep soon and getting to watch CNN like Alan. So I haven't really been able to watch enough recently.
That is all that he ever does, Paul.
I'm jealous. So
That was great. I hope you do get some rest soon and you can sit and hoping that somebody calls an election very soon at some news media outlet. That would be great, and then we could all relax. Thank you. That was really interesting. I know I had a few friends with disabilities who faced a few challenges with the Vote by Mail, the accessible Vote by Mail online system, and you all helped out with that and really appreciate it. So, you know, I think there's always room to grow in the state of California in accessibility, and we learn each election on the ways that it can grow. So thank you for all of your advocacy and assistance.
thank you.
So now I'm going to be calling on some of the individuals who helped to organize others to get the word out about Disability Vote California. The first person I'd like to call on is the man that I forced to be part of this, Steve Miller, who is my political partner in the disability world, particularly in LA County issues. And when Steve emailed me like, we got to do something about something. And I said, yeah, let's organize the state around this, the disability community in the state. And he said, okay, I'll do that. So I appreciate you being working as my partner on this, Steve. Steve also was in charge at Disability Vote California of pulling together several of our webinars, our candidate forums that we did through webinars that were really successful. And so I've asked him to just sort of talk about what you thought about this election generally, and then what you thought of, you know, where we could grow as a coalition and the future. Go ahead, Steve.
And I'm setting my timer because I need to not go too long, and I need to save a couple of minutes that hopefully your husband and Paul, the attorneys, can listen to, because I have a challenge for them as well. First, I really need to make a couple of shout outs to Disability Voices United and to ARC California for the inspiration and not just the inspiration, but so much of the heavy lifting that went into pulling this together and experiencing all the successes that we had. It's one thing to have an idea, it's another thing to be willing to invest the time, the energy, and the stomach lining when things don't work perfectly to do it. And I thought it was marvelous to be part of this initiative. Me personally, my participation represents the collective investment of the Los Angeles Coalition of Service Providers, which is made up of 17 direct service organizations from San Diego through Bakersfield, some of whom you know well: Easter Seals, UCP, ARC of Orange County in Los Angeles, Jay Nolan, Tierra del Sol Foundation, etc. Collectively, those organizations, which I provide some consultation to, serve about 25,000 people. And through this initiative, each and every one of those organizations access the information that everyone helped put together and put online and make accessible, and found ways to drive that information out to their families, and to even include voter education and voter support in the direct services that they offer on a daily basis. To me, this year and this process represents the most successful effort to see this entire state coalesce around the importance of voter education and to get the word out broadly throughout the state. and everybody that participated in this project played a really significant role. And one of the major takeaways is, I think we've established that regardless of the type of organization, whether it's an advocacy organization such as Disability Rights California, Autism Society of Ventura County and LA County, State Council, if you're an advocacy organization, it's clear that you have a good role to play in voter education, voter empowerment, but service provider organizations also realize that they have a critical role in this. And every type of organization found a way to participate in getting the word out and activating to the best that they could. So to me, we've demonstrated that as a community, we can galvanize and we can educate. And that tells me I've only got, if I'm going to take 5 minutes, I've got 2 minutes left. So that's a success. And I think we've created a great foundation for the future. And there's a big future that we need to pursue, because we've only touched half of the equation, which is getting people to the polls. What we still struggle with is helping people understand what their stake is in each election. For instance, there was a congressional race in the north part of LA County. On the ballot was a decision between a candidate who supports each and every one of the Republican administration's proposals to block grant Medicare, to slash public transportation, to do away with the Affordable Care Act, and another candidate who pledged to us on the record that she would fight for each and every one of those things, and pledged that she would seek out other advocates in Congress if she was elected to further the agenda of people with disabilities. And yet our community really was not able to find a collective way to work for the success of that agenda, because we stay away from anything that could look at all like partisanship or active engagement in the political process. And to the attorneys that may be still listening, if the disability community really wants to exercise not just their right to vote, but the power that exists potentially with 25% of the electorate, then we have to find a way for this community to exercise that power to further its agenda. And that is in the political arena. And supported decision-making, informed consent, however we package and appropriately exercise it, we really won't have done our job if we don't really help our stakeholders understand what their stakes are and provide opportunities for them to fully participate in the political process. Politics isn't a bad word. Politics is what the process of a democracy exercising its power is about. There's more we can do, there's more we should do. Whether we do it through this platform or whether we find a way to form a political action committee or other avenues, the disability community can grow into an extraordinarily powerful stakeholder voice if we continue to work towards that. Time.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, I don't know, Alan, if you want to say anything about it, but as nonprofits that are 501c3s cannot endorse a candidate or oppose a candidate. However, you can form other units, such as a 501c4, which is other nonprofits that are 501c4s that can still take contributions, but they're just not tax deductible for the contributor. And you are allowed to take, you're allowed to endorse a candidate or oppose a candidate. So that is something that we could think about. The other thing that you can also think about is that there's a lot of service providers out there that are not nonprofits, that are for-profits, who are absolutely allowed to take positions on candidates. So I think there's other ways.
That's true. That's true. There is, though, there's latitude to clarify what the issues are. in a much more clear way. I don't think people know that members of the Board of Supervisors, for example, can help make sure that the restrooms in the metro stations, the elevators are accessible and they're clean, or that buses can run after 5 o'clock and it can be safe to ride public transportation. But communicating those issues to people running for the Board of Supervisors educates them and also gives our constituency the opportunity to know how those decisions are made and how things affect them. And so I think collectively, even within this group, moving forward, I think we can do a more effective job of highlighting what our most important priorities are and communicating how those priorities appear on the ballot. I think that's something we can do collectively. And then I would love to have the conversation with others about how to become more engaged in the ability to influence public policy through our ability to help voters understand and use the issues. And that's separate. That's a C4. We need to be able to do voter report cards. We need to be able to do a lot of the things that tell candidates that we are out there and that we're a constituency that matters. We have a lot of room to grow in that. I'm not saying that's through this specific entity, but that's really where there's a lot of room for our community to grow and mature as important members of the political community.
Thank you so much, Steve. Our next speaker is Wesley Witherspoon. Wesley is another person that I asked and he graciously agreed to be one of the co-chairs of our Disability Vote California Coalition. Are you there?
Yeah. Yes. Can you hear me?
Hi. Yes, I can. Hi, Wesley. Wesley, by the way, is a longtime expert on voting and has trained probably at this point thousands of self-advocates on voting. So, Wesley, I know you were in charge of voter outreach and engagement. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about what your committee did, and then also like what you thought of the election this year?
Okay, what our committee did, we outreach to 3 different committees. First, we outreach to the self-advocates, we outreach to the family members, and we outreach to the professionals. So we had a team. I remember we had a team, and also we at the very beginning we wrote a survey about getting people involved with the U.S. Census, which ended October 15th, I believe. Then getting people trying to get involved with voting. So is Emma there?
No, she's not one of the panelists.
Yeah, I want to pay Emma give her a big hand, because she was a big part of outreach and connection committee. She was a big thing about it. And my experience as a self-advocate, like getting involved with voting, it's a good thing. It's a good thing getting involved with voting, because self-advocacy is voting and voting is self-advocacy. So we did a lot of different videos, like it was important to vote because it's your rights. And self-advocates, we got the right to make our decisions, rather have someone else make our decisions. And I wanted to say that I did an interview with one of the candidates, and it was good asking the questions. A lot of the parents, a lot of the family members were glad to ask a question to the supervisor candidate. I did. Emma and I spoke to the Autism Society. We were unsuccessful trying to get self-advocate to vote, and it's their choice or not, whether they want to vote or not. So it's their choice. If they don't want to vote, they don't have to vote. It's their choice. So we tried, and we did with the Autism Society, and we went to West Side CAC. And I want to give a shout out to all the members of the West Side CAC. I believe it's 4 of them. I won't mention their names because I don't want to embarrass them. I want to give a shout out to Sandra Adanda. Sandra Adanda was the state council, and she does a really good job, and she's involved with our CAC, our USED. So things that we want to work on. People with disabilities, by the way, the Illinois U.S. State Senator her name is Tammy Duckworth. She has a disability. She's in the wheelchair. And the governor of Texas, his name is Greg Abbott, and he's in the wheelchair, and he's the governor of Texas. So we have people with disabilities that are in office already. So things that we can improve on. We need more people. And I think when the pandemic is over, it's going to be a lot easier. And I think we need to start earlier with voting, because by time we get the ballots, almost a lot of people are voting already. So we need work rather than starting in August. We should start in July. So that's my recommendation for next time. Good social media. I want to give a shout out to Zoey, because Zoey, she does a great job with social media. And we need more civic engagement for people with disabilities. And we need the candidates to take people with disabilities seriously. In the last presidential debate, there was no mention of people with disabilities. So that's not good. That's not good. We need people with disabilities are part of a society. So you need to talk to us too, rather than everyone else. We're a part of society too. And that's one thing I want to work on. And I want to thank Ed for his technical, Ed for technical support. Ed, he did a really good job with technical support. So thank you for that. Thank you, Judy, and thank you for patience and being technical difficulties, because there's a lot of technical difficulties when you do Zoom and web conferencing. So I'm going to give a shout out to all the people I know, the shout out to people in California. Thank you very much, and look forward to working in the near future.
Thank you, Wesley. Thank you for all your incredibly hard work on our panel, and on our coalition. Really appreciate it. Two of our co-chairs of our coalition were unable to join us today, but I definitely want to give them a shout out in case they're watching out there. I want to give a shout out to Marianne Kehler, who took on the sort of messaging and marketing piece. And she was voluntold to be part of this. She didn't volunteer. I told her she had to do it. So we so appreciate, she did an amazing job of sort of getting us focused and organized. And then finally, I really want to thank tremendously Christian Mcmahon from the ARC of California. Christian really, he brought so much to the very beginning of this, because he managed the Disability Vote California website from 2 years ago, allowed us to sort of lump in and use the name and the website, and then continue to really run one of the more important pieces of our coalition, which were the materials, the voter outreach materials. If you go to disabilityvoteca.org, you will see the incredible amounts of materials that he and his committee pulled together, as well as kept updating the website. Unfortunately, neither one could be here, but we want to really say a huge thank you to both of them. I also asked a couple of other folks who were really key parts of our coalition to speak today. The first one is Carly Fulgham, who is the president of Autism Society of Ventura County, who really came in and helped us sort of think about a lot of the issues, particularly related to social media. And we want to thank her and sort of ask her to give us her take on what the work that we did and what we might want to think about for the future. Go ahead, Carly.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much, Judy, for giving me the opportunity to help out. My name is Carly Fulgham. I've been president of Autism Society Ventura County now for over 5 years. I am our first board president on the autism spectrum, and I'm also involved with the Autism Society at the state and national level, and I'm on the board of another organization called the Art of Autism. So I spend a lot of time volunteering with autism nonprofits, and I've really loved this opportunity to be involved with Disability Vote California, because I strongly believe in advocacy, and that if we stand up and ask for what we need as the disability community, that we can really make a difference. And Wesley, while it may be frustrating if somebody says I'm not going to vote this time, at least you've put a little bit of information in the back of their mind, so that maybe in a future election they will participate. And And I did come in about a month or so ago and take over our Facebook social media. And again, I couldn't have done it without Christian and all the information he had on the website, giving me great things to share. And I think that now that we've got a great group of folks together, we can take a break for a month or two, but keep up the momentum and keep up doing posts occasionally on legislation that's coming around that can help people with disabilities, to do action alerts for people to be able to call their senators and representatives. Next time there's a big election at the midterms, I think as soon as we know who the candidates are going to be, we can start doing candidate questionnaires and start doing candidate forums so that we can get that information out and have recordings that we can share when it gets closer to the election and people are actually voting. So there's lots more that we can do in the coming years. And Judy, thank you for letting me be a part of this amazing effort. I don't think I used my full 5 minutes, but I'll pass the ball back to you.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Thank you, Carly. Thank you for all those are really great suggestions. And we do kind of have to get started earlier with everything. You're so correct. Our next speaker is Dan Savino. Dan works with the Association of Regional Center Agencies and has been really active in getting the regional centers to reach out to their communities to ensure that the people with disabilities are registering and voting. So Dan, do you want to talk a little bit about the work you did and what you see sort of the future?
Yeah, so first of all, Daniel Savino, Association of Regional Center Agencies. Thank you, Judy, for inviting me to be a part of this and for having ARCA as a team player in Disability Vote California. It was a pleasure to bring the regional center perspective and network into this conversation to really help connect people and their families and communities to their right to access the ballot box. ARCA's main approach, obviously we work for the regional centers. We don't tell them what to do, they tell us what to do. We're a trade association, we work for them. But one of the things we were able to do is share out the messaging both through action alerts and social media that was often repurposed, not only by the regional centers, but in one case, and I'll walk you through a quintet of action alerts that we did by the broader community. So a quick screen share. There we go. Excellent. You should be seeing the action alert that we first had a while back. This was when we first joined the coalition and really wanted to get the word out to the community about not only the work of Disability Vote California, but what are the steps you can take to make sure you're vote ready. Our messaging was very consistent. We focused on people getting to the ballot box, understanding what their rights were, recognizing that they had resources available in their community, and most importantly, through Disability Vote California. Definitely made a strong effort to keep consistency in branding and logos. You saw this in our next one in a different fashion. In September, late September, was National Voter Registration Day. And we joined with a few organizations, including Disability Voices United, Disability Vote California, some service providers, as well as regional centers, in doing a coordinated action alert. This action alert went out at 10 a.m. on the same day. Everybody sent it out to their network, so it was really kind of cool to coordinate it. The action alert itself was very straightforward, top level. Hey, today is voter registration day. You should go and get registered. It's got links for how to do that in California, as well as links to the broader world. You know, we don't know that everybody getting this is a California resident. We want to make sure that anybody who gets our information can put it to use, and this action alert is a great example of it. And of course, referring back to Disability Vote California. Once the registration deadline passed, we switched our messaging to how you can become a provisional voter. And California allows conditional voter registration, or same-day voter registration, as it's sometimes called. Disability Vote California had a really great plain language explainer that we linked to in here. And of course, the Secretary of State being the official source of information, we also cross-reference them. And again, continuing to keep the Disability Vote California hub alive in this conversation. The penultimate email that we sent out was about the importance of getting in your ballots. Obviously, there's still talk about the way mail-in ballots are done. California allows a mail-in ballot to be counted up to 17 days after the election, as long as it was postmarked by the 3rd of November. Any state that has mail-in balloting, they all require the ballot to be postmarked by the 3rd, but how much longer after it can be received? So if the mailman's slow, how long can you wait before the ballot is invalidated? And wanting to make sure that folks understood that there is that gray zone and there is litigation out there, we took the focus of, hey, now's the time to get your ballot in, drop it off in person at an official ballot box, or go to an early voting location. And again, keeping the messaging, bringing it back to the hub of the coalition, that is Disability Vote California. And day of, go vote. The simplest message possible, with one of 3 ways that you can vote. This was sent on Tuesday, November 3rd. Really final way to get people out there. We made use of that excellent collage that Disability Vote California put together, people in action, folks that in our community exercising their right to vote. And a reminder that, it's day of, if you're experiencing difficulty voting, Disability Rights California has that voting line, which the previous speaker discussed, the work going on with that, and referred them back to this, because we want to make sure that if people are going and they're experiencing problems, they need a place of expertise to go to, and DRC's voting hotline was an excellent option there. So, and sharing. What happened with all of these is that they were picked up by other organizations. I know that whether it's an individual, regional center employee of the center itself and their newsletters, I can see through the back end that these are getting forwarded on and shared on. If I see it's opened by Judy Mark 500 times, I know that she's sending it on. And I can see these basic metrics, which is for me very positive. And it indicates that our message is getting traction. People are sharing it with their networks. It's getting put out more broadly. And similarly, I've seen elements of all of these action alerts used in some cases verbatim in other organizations' publications. So there are more than a few regional centers where I've seen stuff from our action alerts copy pasted into their own, which is excellent. I've had service providers, provider organizations, products say, hey, we'd like to use some of this. Awesome. This is for the benefit of the community. We want to get the message out there. So I was really happy to be a part of and to have our association as a part of messaging that was able to be used broadly by a diverse range of folks to really help amplify the message that getting out and voting is your right and your responsibility and your opportunity. Of course, we paired this with social media. We have Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, depending on the circumstance and the particular message of the day, we would use those. But really our most forward-facing approach in this was this. Separately, we did provide training and backup information, supporting information to the ARCA Client Advisory Committee. We have a CAC that includes representatives from all the regional centers. I actually gave a presentation to them on how you're able to access the ballot. What does it mean to go and vote? How do you register? Got some very positive feedback from our folks. I was actually quite pleased that it was well received. We also provided them supporting information, plain language documents that they were able to take back to their home regional center client advisory committees and share with their peers and their colleagues. So we were also able to support directly to our community information on how to get to the ballot box and use your right to vote. So it was an excellent process. We very much appreciated being a part of it. And I'd of course be remiss if I didn't say I appreciated working with Steve and helping him in his leadership role, coordinating multiple candidate forums, connecting him to regional centers in those candidates' districts, and helping him work with our partners in the regional centers locally to really bring these events together and make them fantastic events. So really appreciate the opportunities to support Steve's good work with that. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Dan, and it was great to work with you and Amy on this and other members of the ARCA team. Appreciate it. We now have asked a couple of self-advocates to sort of talk about what they thought, not just about the work that we did at Disability Vote California, but also what they, how they felt about the election this year. These are their personal feelings. They don't represent any nonprofit. But I just want to take a moment to say how amazing it was that we had so many self-advocates involved in Disability Vote California. I want to be very clear to those of you watching that this wasn't a top-down coalition. This really was, this wasn't about people who have PhDs in some sort of degree, or some sort of degree telling families and self-advocates what we should do around the election. We really were in charge. We were very much partners with the professionals in our field. And there were so many self-advocates who appeared on our webinars, on every single one of our webinars that Disability Voices United coordinated. We also had many self-advocates talk about why they vote. We had many of them help to develop the plain language materials with Christian. And when we talk about self-advocates, we're talking about self-advocates of all disabilities. While many of us are really active in the intellectual and developmental disability community, we had people from the blind community, from the deaf community, from the physical disability community, from the mental health community, all of whom appeared on our webinars, talked about how important the right to vote is, and really contributed so much. And I want to thank, and some of them are actually listening in, and Howard McBroom, who's one of our greatest supporters, has been just such a loyal fan and has done so much. Keisha Weller has been part of our incredible team as well, and I want to thank both of them. Two of our self-advocates have agreed to talk a little bit, and first I want to introduce Zoey Giesberg, who was a key and early member of the coalition. Go ahead, Zoey.
Thanks, Judy. It really was an honor to be invited by you to join this. As someone who is politically active, who has been building on community organization basically throughout my entire life, this is in my blood. But and I knew that this election very early on, probably at least since 2016, was going to be one of the biggest and most consequential of my lifetimes. I've gone through witnessing so many different pivotal elections of my life, from the Bush years to the Obama years and through the Trump years. And it really occurs to me that if there's anything the past 4 years has done, it has made the disability community a lot more visible, a lot more active. And now people are really beginning to pay attention to us in a way that I have never, ever seen, from protesters trying to save the Affordable Care Act in 2017, and so much more. I was incredibly impressed by our ability to organize and hold various candidates from the local to even the Democratic primary to talk about disability, to mention disability in their plans, and have real robust, things that we cared about, community integration, the personal choice, healthcare, service provider care, family care, guardian care. It's been absolutely thoroughly phenomenal. And it really goes to show that we are a force to be reckoned with. And I think it's going to continue in the coming years because, once a group speaks up, it's really hard to shut them up. I see good things for our community, and I see the effort, and I hope I've tried to be part of the effort to really get disabled people to really make our voices known, to make our needs loud so that people can't ignore them. I think I see something really big and a big societal shift happening. And this year, if anything has gone on, it is that this is a time of massive change. And with COVID, it really threw in the urgency of so many issues, but particularly the disability community, because more and more people who are getting and surviving COVID now have tons of after effects that will affect their health for the rest of their lives. The disability community is growing, and therefore we have almost a bigger voice and a bigger need than ever before on an unprecedented level, as if we didn't already have those before. And it's thoroughly remarkable to see the level of engagement and how people care. And I want to remind people that you do have a voice. We have a voice, and that voice is so crucial to getting and keeping our democracy intact. And even though it is incredibly stressful, this has been an incredibly stressful year. I took the day after election off from work because I was so stressed, just to focus on self-care. And that is something we do need, whether it's, taking a bubble bath and getting a massage, or just cleaning your room. Obviously, it's a little hard to get a massage right now due to the pandemic, but this is important work. This is huge. And it's and yes, following the news and following politics and getting actively involved is so much work, but it is so worth it. And I see good things, and I see this coalition going so far and doing so much more good for the world. Again, thank you, Judy. Thank you, everyone in the coalition. I'm so happy to have been part of it.
Thank you, Zoey. I look forward to working with you in the future as well. Our final presenter, Sophia Vergara. Sophia, we want to hear from you on what you thought of the election and what you think we should be doing in the future. Go ahead, Sophia.
Thank you, Judy. I'm going to just start like everyone and say how much of a pleasure it has been to be part of this coalition. I think it was really important for me to be a part of it because I have always known the power of the collective disability voice, but this really, this experience of working with all of you on the coalition just really made it all that much clearer for me that advocacy really does work. And looking back at the disability rights movement and the history of it, it really, to piggyback on what Steve was saying, the idea of not just getting the vote out, but also making people realize that we need to continue to speak with the collective voice as the disability community and the power of us as a political group. Also, it all just made this experience of working together with everyone just made it really clear that we have a voice, and if we work together, not just as separate entities with separate disabilities, but we come together as a collective, we can change a lot of things. And just to piggyback on what Zoey was saying, I think it is very clear that the more we brought up the idea of how powerful we are as a collective, the more different entities are going to look at us and think we can't turn a blind eye to these issues, which gives us more clout, for lack of a better word. So it was just really great to be able to have this dialogue with all of you and really be as much a part of it as I could. And I look forward to continuing it as we go forward and being an active member. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophia. Really appreciate all of our presenters right now. We are going to move, all of our presenters, and right now we're going to move to the question and answer portion. So for those of you who would like to ask a question through one of our, in our audience, you can ask it one of several ways. You can ask it through the Q&A. And Nasreen, I've seen all of your wonderful questions. Thank you. You can also ask it in the chat. And if you would like to ask a question in person, you can use the raise hand feature, and we're happy to elevate you to a panel member so that you can ask your question. So while I'm waiting to see if anybody has any additional questions, I wanted to just bring Alan back because I think that a lot of people are really, he's gonna have to move over, sorry. I think a lot of people are somewhat confused about the Electoral College and why we use the Electoral College and how, and why we don't have a result yet, even though clearly 4 million more people in the presidential race, I should say, we have 4 million more people voting for Vice President Biden than President Trump. And so why has this happened? So if you don't mind explaining that.
Sure. Well, I'm not going to get into why we have an electoral college, but it's in the Constitution. But what it is that we don't have in this country a direct election of the voters, by the voters of the president. We technically, the president is elected by members of the Electoral College, and each state is allocated Electoral College votes based on the number of members of Congress that they have. So for a state like Arizona, which has 9 representatives in the U.S. House of Representatives plus 2 U.S. senators, they have 11 electoral votes. So every state has a minimum of 3 electoral votes up to California's 55. And generally speaking, most states will allocate all of their electoral votes to whichever candidate receives the most number of popular votes in their state. There are a couple of states, notably Maine and Nebraska, which allocate some of their electoral votes based on congressional districts. So not all of the, so for example, Nebraska has 5 electoral votes and President Trump is going to win 4 of them and Joe Biden will win 1 of them because one of the Nebraska congressional districts favor Joe Biden. But for almost all the states, whoever wins, whether it's by 1 vote or by, in California's case, could be 5 million votes, it's the same result. It counts, it only translates into a specific number of electoral votes. So it's for that reason that, as Judy said, you have Joe Biden is ahead in the popular vote count by over 4 million, a number that will end up likely being over 5 million in the end. But the electoral vote, the vote results in particular states are not yet known, and those are needed in order for one of the candidates to have a majority of the electoral votes, which is the number 270, which everybody talks about. So,
thanks, Alan. I have a question that I wanted to ask for any of our panelists. So one of the things that I noticed when I was working with Disability Vote California is that when I'm a parent myself, and when I was speaking to other parents who are wanting to who have a adult son or daughter with a disability. Excuse me. I found that many of them were hesitant to allow their child to vote. Not that their child has a right to vote, but certainly support their adult child in voting. And had I kind of realized this at the beginning, I think I would have say that we should probably have put more effort into that area at Disability Vote California to ensure that we're educating parents, that even people with disabilities who need, a maximum amount of support to vote, should have that right to vote, and how to give them and really encourage that. The other sort of area that I saw was a big need was working with the various immigrant communities, some of whom maybe are not U.S. citizens themselves, but their children are U.S. citizens. And so they maybe, as parents, don't have a history in voting, but want to make sure that their children vote. And I know that my daughter Emma and our coalition partners at the Integrated Community Collaborative worked a lot with the Spanish-speaking parents to educate them on that. But I think that, and we also worked with the Ethiopian parents with Mulugeta, but I think that there's a lot more work that really needs to be done. So I wanted to sort of throw out those two areas and see if anybody wants to comment on that, any of our panelists. Anybody can unmute and chime in. I don't see anybody. Oh, go ahead, Zoe.
Judy, if nobody else, I don't want to hog other people's time.
No, that's so. First, we'll start with Zoe, and then we'll come to you, Steve.
I think there's a fear among a lot of communities, and speaking from my perspective as someone who has worked with plenty of immigrant communities, is that there's a fear of exercising that power because they're afraid about, ICE and other immigrant authorities catching up with them. It's a problem that also prevents a lot of the communities from getting and seeking services that they need because it's not really a totally baseless assumption. And I think part of it is assuaging those fears. And as far as people who are concerned about their children voting, I think part of it is education, in parents helping educate their kids in what the different races are, what the different levels of government are. And I think there's a hesitancy from my experience as a direct support professional, as well as a person with autism, that they don't want to do it because it's too complicated. There's a lot of preconceived notions that we don't understand things beyond shiny and wah. And that's kind of part of the general stigma against developmentally, intellectually, and pretty much any disabled person. It's a stigma that I think we have to really combat that as hard as possible and ensure people that they do have rights, that their children are complex beings. And as Walt Whitman said in one of my favorite quotes of all time, we all contain multitudes.
That's beautiful. I love that. Sandra in the chat mentioned that many parents have said to her that they don't believe their children are able to understand what voting means. Sandra, I've heard exactly the same thing, and I feel like we need to really work on that. Steve, did you want to make any comments on that?
Well, I thought some good progress was made with the presentation on support.
Can you turn your camera on? Yeah, there you go, perfect.
I thought good progress was made through the presentation on supported decision making. I think there's family members who have children, adult children with significant intellectual disabilities, who are either elderly or from a previous generation, have not, their history is not one where their adult children have been engaged and involved in much decision making in their own lives. And so to hit them like confronted directly with something like voting doesn't strike them as reasonable. However, we know that everyone can make informed decisions if the information is made relevant to their life and they can express how they feel about it, either with words or pictures or gestures or however. And I think it's an education for families to help them recognize that their children do make decisions about their own lives, and that this voting matters so much in their own lives. So again, I'd say it's education, not lecturing. The lecture part has never worked for anyone in terms of changing people's, views.
Yeah, good points. Any of our other panelists want to try to address either that issue around parents, trying to educate parents, and also around the immigrant communities? Not
Yeah,
sure.
this is Carly. I'm happy to chime in on that. I think, I believe Sandra, you put a comment in the chat that many parents don't believe their children are able to understand what voting means. And and your words really made me remember my good friend and self-advocate, Samuel Kaposi. He couldn't communicate at all till he was 16, and now in his early 20s, he's attending law school. So I think really, in his words, presumed competence is a message that we need to get out to the disability community caregivers to say, hey, let's find a way to let them have their voice and give them the information they need to make an informed decision. And we do also have issues with the immigrant communities. There are some countries where as you said, being politically active is criminal or deadly, depending on the country. And that, I think that goes hand in hand with, even just in some cases with immigrant communities, we have trouble getting parents to let their children have a diagnosis, to get services. And so it really goes hand in hand when all of our organizations are out year round working with those communities to try to get help to more people. We can include in that conversation the right to vote.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And I believe that I agree with you that it should start at the youngest ages, and that just like supported decision making needs to be in children's IEPs from the youngest age possible, where just it's not even supported decision making, it's just decision making goals, then it becomes much more easy to make those choices because you've been making choices your whole life about small things like what shirt to wear. And then when you get older, you make bigger and more important choices, just like people without disabilities do. So we're getting close to our end time. I want to thank all of our panelists, Alan, Paul, Steve, Wesley, Carly, Dan, Zoey, and Sophia. I want to thank everybody who has been part of the Disability Vote California network, and all the hard work that we've done. The materials that were produced will stay up on this website forever, and they are really important materials. I want to thank all of the members who just worked really hard. My daughter Emma, who basically took off the semester at college and has been working for DVC for much of her days, as well as her friend Katie and all of the other people. I want to thank my staff, Ed Herzl, who's just been so committed to this, personally passionate about these issues, and all the other staff at Disability Voices United. So thank you to everybody, and let's just keep getting the votes out, and we have another election in Georgia that we could potentially try to, maybe we'll create Disability Vote Georgia. I don't know, even though we don't live there, we'll see. But everybody take care and be safe out there. Bye-bye.